I've noticed over the years many of these hidden gem videos tend to regurgitate the same games over and over regardless what system it is. Which is fine, maybe they were actually hidden at one point. However, after enough repetition and enough people mentioning the same thing, they cease to be hidden gems. That said, I do have a handful of games here I would like to show you that I never hear anybody talk about. And if they do, it might be maybe 1 out of like 50 videos. This list is in no particular order. It spans across multiple systems, so enough jabbering, let's get started. One Must Fall 2097 is a one-on-one fighting game released in 1994 exclusively for PC, MS-DOS to be precise. Older PC gamers may recognize this, but I've yet to see a single channel that I watch mention it. It's a shame that this didn't get more exposure or at least a console port, because the first time I saw this it really blew me away. The controls are simple, it's just a punch and a kick button, but the moveset is similar to what you would have on Street Fighter 2. The difference here though with this game is you have things like super combos, you get a tournament mode which lets you fight other opponents, each with their own personality, and earn money to upgrade your robot and customize it over time. There are also hazards in each arena that you fight in, which is pretty cool. Last but not least, you can also play this game online either through LAN connection or a dial-up modem. At the time of its release, all of these features this game had were absolutely unheard of. Think about it, this is 1994 we're talking about. Did I mention it also has an absolutely jamming soundtrack? Nearly 10 years later in 2003, we did get a sequel called One Must Fall Battlegrounds, but unfortunately it was a piece of crap compared to this. So we never saw another game in the series. Like many licensed games, Inspector Gadget will seriously test your patience. It is not an easy game. It's a platformer with several puzzle elements, which is cool, but the issue is enemies have a knack for jumping in front of you at the perfect time where you cannot possibly avoid them unless you already know that they're going to be there. This means that there is a lot of memorization involved for these levels. That said though, you get the same kind of thing with The Lion King and people love that game. If you can look past the flaws and the high difficulty, this is actually pretty fun. I love the art style, it has fun music, fun sense of humor, it has some cool unique ideas implemented with the sub-items that you use. You have to use sub-items. If you don't, you will not get through the level, period. But at the same time, there's no one way to beat a level because they're actually pretty huge in terms of scale. If you've exhausted your platforming options on the Super Nintendo and you want to try something a little different, give this one a chance. Just don't have any sharp or heavy objects nearby when you rage quit. Kinetica at first glance is just your typical futuristic racing game on the PS2. We've seen this before, right? The Extreme G series, Wipeout, etc. Well, the gimmick to this one is that you're actually kind of a human in a cybernetic suit, and you have to do tricks while racing to build boost. The levels themselves also get pretty crazy because your character can flip all around, essentially be racing upside down. Think of like Roll Cage on the PS1. It has some seriously gorgeous graphics for PS2, which also run at a constant 60 frames per second. It features an excellent techno soundtrack that really fits the feel of the game, and the best part about the soundtrack is it's actually memorable. It's not generic cookie cutter stuff, it actually sticks in your head after a while. As you're racing, you'll get several items to pick up once you fill the power-up gauge, and they range anywhere from hitting your enemies with a pulse charge to having an infinite boost temporarily to maybe having a super boost, which is faster than a regular boost. There is some rubber banding that happens, just like any old racing game, but it's not enough to really ruin the experience. It keeps you on your toes. Kinetica is most definitely a hidden gem, and I always have to point it out and mention it any chance I get whenever the topic comes up as far as racing games or PS2 or whatever. The biggest thing that makes this game for me though is the crazy design of the tracks. I just love multi-tiered levels in any game that have branching paths. It's just endless fun and it only gets better as you progress. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project. This is another sequel that I feel does not get nearly enough credit or attention. It is always overlooked. The majority of the people who mention playing Turtles games always talk about either the arcade game, Turtles in Time, or the first two games on the NES. 3 is always skipped, and I'm not sure why. As far as the NES games go, this one is by far the most polished out of all of them. They dialed in the controls pretty much perfectly. You have unique special attacks for each character now. It has pretty good graphics for being an 8-bit NES game. Great music, great sound effects with a lot of punch to them. Not much to complain about really. I honestly think this is the best out of the NES games. That said, this is one difficult game. It's definitely best if you play with a friend because you are going to get smacked around across the screen a bunch of times whether you like it or not. It gets very hard after a couple levels, but that does not detract from how fun the game is. It has good boss fights. The fact that each turtle has their own unique special attack now adds some needed depth, and it's pretty long too considering it's a beat 'em up. If you're a Turtles fan or just a beat 'em up fan in general, you owe it to yourself to give this one a shot. You won't regret it. If you like playing on the actual hardware, it is the more expensive of the 3 games, but it is still obtainable. It's about the $40 price range, $40 to $50, and it's also on the Cowabunga collection, which released on all major platforms if you prefer that way for current gen systems. When I was a kid, we had Blockbuster, Movie Gallery, Video Hut, and Hollywood Video in my area. None of them had battle cars for the Super Nintendo. However, if I were visiting family, I would go to Haleyville, Alabama, about an hour and a half away, and there was this place called Lion's Den, and they always had it. My older brother and I rented this game so many times our parents could have just bought the stinking game. Do you like F-Zero? If you do, then you'll like battle cars. Believe it or not, I actually prefer battle cars to the original F-Zero. The atmosphere of the game is really cool, it's like apocalyptic, and once again it has an incredible and memorable soundtrack, one of the best on the system. In single player, you pick between several cars which are equipped with weapons, and over time you get to upgrade your vehicle as well. You will first race a cross-country track, which is basically just a qualifying match to see if you can get through the track in time, and then you have a slightly harder version of that track while you're going head-to-head with a boss character, or they call it a rival, along with the other vehicles on the road. This one can get very challenging, and if you happen to hit the wall, you basically turn into a bumper car. But at the same time, it's pretty forgiving, and you can catch back up as long as you don't keep hitting the wall. You also have the ability to drift with the L and R buttons, which helps a lot. The game is very rewarding and it's very fun progressing through it because of the sheer variety of tracks you get to race and the fact that you can upgrade your vehicle along the way. If you happen to have a friend to play with, you can also do co-op or head-to-head races. Both are a blast. This is actually my favorite racing game on the Super Nintendo, and more people need to know about it. Another great MS-DOS game, Jazz Jackrabbit, is pretty much Sonic the Hedgehog with a gun, as you can see on screen. It even has special stages that are very reminiscent of Sonic. And because it is a run and gun, there are multiple weapons you can pick up along the way, which surprisingly have some variety to them. My favorite is probably the grenade launcher thing because they bounce around like crazy and will blow up on anything they touch, so that's pretty fun. It's an extremely fast-paced game that runs at 60 frames per second at all times, and to be honest with you, sometimes it can be a little too fast. The controls are very touchy, and Jazz picks up speed almost immediately when you start moving. So, I'm a 90s kid, so naturally I was all about some Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Fast forward 30 years later and this game still rocks. Whether you're a fan of the IP or not, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie is the total package for a beat 'em up game. They seriously hit a slam dunk on pretty much every front here. It's got the characters, it's accurate to the movie itself, it has a rockin' soundtrack, great controls, it has cutscenes, I can keep going. It is seriously beyond me why this game does not get the credit it deserves. I very rarely hear anyone mention it whatsoever. Maybe because of the name, people will see a licensed property and thinks it sucks automatically, I guess, I don't know. But anyway, I'm not kidding, this is one of the best beat 'em ups on the system, or really on any system in my opinion. It's up there with Streets of Rage for me. The only critique maybe that I would have to give it is that the enemies can be a bit repetitive. You do fight the same kind of enemy over and over, but at the same time, that's kind of how the TV show and the movie are. Despite that though, there is some variety here because of the boss fights. Sometimes they can be recurring, but the way that it's done is very clever and it makes sense. You'll also eventually branch off from your normal fighting as the Rangers and get into one-on-one battles with the Zords, and that's pretty fun. As for difficulty, I think it has just the right amount of challenge. You can't just breeze through the game, you actually do have to pay attention to what you're doing or you will get your own ass handed to you. But at the same time, it's not so hard that you'll never beat it. It's pretty forgiving. This is not just a good beat 'em up for being a Genesis game or just good as a Power Rangers game, no. This is a good game in general, seriously try it. Also, rest in peace Tui Trang and Jason David Frank. Gundam Wing Endless Duel is a one-on-one fighting game that unfortunately never left Japan. It's a shame too because this is one of the best fighting games on the Super Nintendo. If you've played all the Street Fighters and the Mortal Kombats and you want something different, give this a go. The developers, Tengo Project, are the same team behind the Ninja Warriors and Power Rangers Fighting Edition, and it shows. If you've played either of those, you could tell right away they're using the same engine, and some sound effects are recycled, but that's really not a bad thing, because this game kicks ass. In terms of controls, think Guilty Gear before Guilty Gear. It's a 4-face button deal, or you could think of like Power Rangers Fighting Edition, except much better. You have 9 characters to choose from, all with very different abilities from one another, so there's quite a bit of variety. You also have super moves or super combos like you do in a more modern fighter. You can shoot bullets from across the screen, you've got an energy gauge. It's very, very modern considering this is a Super Nintendo game. It's also pretty fast-paced considering you're in giant robots as well. And this game also has a great, great soundtrack, so it's very enjoyable, very memorable, and it's easy to pick up and play. There's not that high of a learning curve to it, yet if you get good at the game, you can perform some crazy combos. For those who aren't familiar with the series, Rolling Thunder is pretty much a cover shooter before cover shooters were a thing. You go through doors in the background or peek behind boxes to take cover. The way it plays kind of reminds me of the older Shinobi games like the original or Revenge of Shinobi, in that there's a large emphasis on dodging enemy attacks and projectiles instead of simply mowing through them like you would on a lot of platformers or beat 'em ups. In between levels, you get to pick between several sub-weapons, and once you beat a level, that's it. You have to choose a different weapon afterwards. Kinda interesting the way they implement this. 3 is on my list because I only ever really hear the first game being mentioned anywhere. It's a wonderful addition to the Genesis library. Very fast-paced and action-packed, it runs excellent, has great controls, nice graphics. It is hard as hell though, but not impossible. When you die in this game, it'll be frustrating, yet at the same time, you'll know it's most definitely your own fault. So it kinda gives you the incentive to keep going. Make no mistake though, it is tough as nails. After a level or 2, it gets relentless. Other than that though, I can't really say enough good things about this game. It's definitely a favorite of mine that I come back to often, despite me being awful at it. X-Kaliber 2097 is a pretty middle-of-the-road action platformer, but the reason I love it is mostly because of the atmosphere of it. It has that typical sci-fi or cyberpunk feel to it, has music from Psycho Sonic, which I think is hella cool. I wish those guys were still around. And of course, there is some nostalgia with me involved too, because my cousin had this game when we were kids. We played it all the time. In terms of the gameplay, the control is pretty stiff, but once you get used to that, there is still some fun to be had here. You run to the right, you beat a boss, rinse and repeat. Sounds like the game is pretty mediocre. It might be, I don't know, but I still think it is worth checking out at least once if you've never heard of it. There is a 2-player mode which lets you and a friend fight head to head, but don't bother, that part does suck. This is an honorable mention because I've started to see other channels finally start taking notice of this game, but I wanted to point it out anyway. Normally with X-Men, you hear about either the arcade game or the first X-Men game on the Genesis. That's fine, but X-Men 2 Clone Wars I think is the best of the bunch, at least when it comes to the 16-bit generation. It's sort of similar to the original X-Men game, except pretty much everything about it is improved. Better animation, better control, better sound, better graphics, better everything. There's a good roster of characters here, all with their unique abilities to choose from. Personally, I like using Nightcrawler or Gambit the best. The control isn't perfect, it can be a little wonky at times, but it is still dialed in much better than the predecessor. Creative and lengthy level design here, good replay value because of that. It is quite challenging, but not impossible. For any X-Men fan, this is not one to miss out on. So that's my list. If this video does fairly well, I'll probably make a part 2 because I can keep going. Do you have any suggestions for the next video? Did you play any of the ones that I mentioned here? If you would, leave a like and a comment below and tell me what you think. Until next time, horns up.